Hi, my name is William. This short presentation will last about 14 minutes. I have been meaning get around to preparing it for some time. I have based most of what you see and hear on research. I am using synthetic voices for clarity. I do not intend to offend or defend. I'm just presenting facts instead of prejudiced memes and social media drivel. Thanks for listening. Britain's past is often discussed today in stark and emotional terms. In popular media and online commentary, the story of Britain's empire is frequently reduced to a single narrative: exploitation, racism, and oppression. These elements undeniably existed and should never be denied. Yet history is rarely so simple. When Britain's imperial past is portrayed only as a catalogue of sins, something important is lost: the broader understanding of how modern global systems came into being and why they continue to function as they do. This essay does not seek to glorify empire, nor to deny the suffering that accompanied it. Instead, it argues that Britain's global influence also produced institutions, technologies, and shared systems that continue to benefit humanity. To recognize these contributions is not to excuse injustice, but to resist the modern habit of judging history through slogans rather than evidence. A world connected by a common language. One of Britain's most enduring legacies is the global spread of the English language. Today, English functions as the world's primary shared language. It is the dominant language of science, aviation, shipping, diplomacy, computing, and international trade. In India, English acts as a neutral link language among hundreds of regional languages, allowing communication across states, courts, universities, and businesses. In Nigeria, English enables national unity in a country with more than 500 languages. Across the Caribbean, English allows small island nations to engage directly with global markets and international institutions. This linguistic inheritance was not designed as a benevolent project, but its long-term effects are clear: access to global knowledge, reduced barriers to trade, and participation in international life on relatively equal terms. Law, rights, and political institutions. British legal traditions shaped systems across India, Africa, and the Caribbean, particularly through common law. These systems emphasized legal precedent, judicial independence, and procedural fairness. In India, British established courts and civil services became the framework for the world's largest democracy after independence. The Indian Constitution, though uniquely Indian, operates within a legal culture that values judicial review, due process, and rights-based claims, principles that now protect Indian citizens from arbitrary power. In African nations such as Kenya and Ghana, British-derived legal systems continue to underpin commercial law and constitutional governance. Importantly, these same legal tools were often used by anti-colonial movements to challenge imperial rule itself. A frequent social media claim is that colonial law existed only to oppress. This is another example of half a truth. While law was certainly unevenly applied, it also introduced concepts, rights, courts, contracts, that later empowered independence movements and modern civil society.
Infrastructure, railways, ports, and national economies. Few legacies are as tangible as infrastructure. Britain built railways, ports, and communication networks across its empire, often for imperial efficiency, but with enduring consequences. India's railway system, one of the largest in the world, was initiated under British rule. After independence, it became a tool of national integration, economic development, and mass mobility. Today it is an Indian institution serving Indian priorities. In parts of Africa, railway lines connected landlocked regions to ports, enabling trade networks that still exist today. In the Caribbean, ports and shipping infrastructure allowed small economies to remain connected to global commerce rather than isolated. A common online argument claims that colonizers stole wealth and left nothing behind, while extraction occurred. This framing ignores the durable economic platforms that remained, and that post-colonial states actively chose to retain and expand. Maritime power, security, and the end of the slave trade. Britain's naval dominance had global consequences beyond empire. From the early 19th century, the Royal Navy patrolled international waters to suppress piracy and, crucially, the transatlantic slave trade. This effort extended to the West African coast and the Caribbean, where British naval patrols intercepted slave ships and enforced abolition treaties. Britain spent vast sums compensating former slave owners at home and maintaining naval operations abroad, hardly the actions of a nation indifferent to the practice. Online discourse often claims Britain ended slavery only when it became unprofitable. This is misleading. Slavery remained economically viable in many regions when abolition occurred. Britain chose to dismantle a system from which it still benefited materially, an historically unusual decision.
Administration, education, and the modern state. British imperial governance introduced standardized administration, censuses, land records, taxation systems, and civil services based on merit rather than aristocratic birth. In India, the civil service became a pillar of state continuity. In Africa and the Caribbean, administrative structures allowed new nations to function immediately after independence rather than collapse into chaos. Educational institutions founded during colonial periods also became engines of local leadership. Many independence leaders, from India to the Caribbean, were educated within these systems and used that education to challenge empire itself.
Responding to common social media counterarguments. Britain destroyed functioning societies. Pre-colonial societies were diverse, some highly organized, others fragmented, many engaged in warfare or slavery of their own. Empire disrupted existing systems, but it also replaced them with institutions that enabled modern states to exist at scale. All benefits were accidental, so they don't count. Intent does not determine outcome. Roads built for empire still carry local commerce. Laws designed for administration still protect citizens. Dismissing outcomes because motives were mixed is intellectually lazy. Talking about benefits excuses racism. It does not. Moral judgment and historical analysis are not the same activity. One can condemn racism while recognizing institutional legacies. Former colonies would have developed better alone. This is unknowable and speculative. History is not a controlled experiment. What we can observe is that many post-colonial states chose to retain British-derived systems because they were functional.
Conclusion: choosing history over hashtags. Britain's imperial history was neither uniquely wicked nor morally pure. It was shaped by the values, ambitions, and limitations of its time. Its legacy includes suffering and exploitation, but also the foundations of modern law, infrastructure, global communication, and governance used by billions today. The modern tendency to compress this complexity into viral outrage does not enlighten, it obscures. A serious engagement with history requires the ability to hold competing truths without panic or posturing. To understand Britain's past honestly is not to defend empire. It is to understand how the modern world came to be, and why reducing history to memes helps no one.
Appendix 1. Common questions and claims about Britain and empire. Wasn't the British Empire built entirely on racism? Racist ideas certainly existed and were often used to justify empire, especially in the 19th century. However, empire was not founded as a racial project in the modern sense. It evolved over centuries through trade, war, alliances, and administration. Importantly, British political culture also produced strong anti-racist and abolitionist movements that challenged empire from within and eventually reshaped it. Did Britain steal wealth and leave colonies poorer? Britain extracted resources, but the idea that it left nothing behind is false. Legal systems, infrastructure, education, ports, railways, administrative institutions, and global trade access remained after independence. Many former colonies retained these systems voluntarily because they worked. Economic outcomes since independence have varied widely, showing that post-colonial choices matter as much as colonial history.
Weren't railways and roads only built to exploit people? They were built primarily for imperial efficiency, yes. But infrastructure does not vanish when motives change. Railways in South Asia and Africa became national assets after independence, supporting internal trade, migration, and economic integration. Motive explains origin, not long-term value. Did Britain really help end slavery, or is that propaganda? Britain both participated in and later opposed slavery. After abolition, it committed large naval and financial resources to suppressing the slave trade globally for decades. This does not erase earlier involvement, but it does mean Britain played a decisive role in ending a practice that had existed across civilizations for thousands of years. Why talk about benefits at all? Doesn't that minimize suffering? No, moral judgment and historical understanding are different tasks. Recognizing institutional legacies does not excuse violence or injustice. It simply acknowledges reality. History can contain harm and progress at the same time.
Appendix 2. Sources and further reading. Broad, balanced histories of empire. These works neither glorify nor demonize empire and are widely cited. Empire by Niall Ferguson. A global overview arguing that British imperial institutions shaped modern globalization. Controversial in places, but rigorously argued and useful for institutional analysis. The British Empire by Jeremy Paxman. Accessible and balanced, acknowledging brutality while explaining how empire functioned in practice. Britain's Empire. Richard got more critical in tone. Useful for understanding the strongest arguments against empire, important for balance. India, Law, Railways, and Governance in Glorious Empire by Shashi Tharoor. Highly critical of British rule, valuable as a counterpoint. Reading it alongside other works strengthens credibility. The Argumentative Indian by Amartya Senator explores how legal, linguistic, and political traditions shaped India's democratic culture. Indian Railways, Official History Pages, demonstrates how colonial-era infrastructure became a national institution after independence.
Would former colonies have developed better without Britain? This is unknowable. History is not a controlled experiment. What we can observe is that many independent nations retained British-derived systems, law, language, administration, because they provided stability and continuity. Outcomes since independence vary greatly, suggesting that internal governance and global conditions also play major roles. Isn't this just nostalgia or empire apologism? No, apologism denies wrongdoing. This argument does not. It rejects the idea that history must be judged only through modern moral slogans. Understanding complexity is not the same as endorsement. Why does this debate matter today? Because distorted history fuels resentment, misinformation, and division. A society that cannot discuss its past honestly, without denial or self-hatred, struggles to understand the present. Serious history helps people think. Slogans help people argue.
Well, thank you for going this far with me. I've long been meaning to get round to writing this stuff and finally stopped procrastinating and got my arse into gear. History is not a morality play with heroes and villains, neatly assigned. It's the study of how real societies, imperfect ones, conflicted ones, how they shape the world we now live in. Serious reading will always replace outrage with understanding. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll leave it there. Thank you.